Isabella never imagined that the city's most ruthless crime lord had spent months hunting for her. She had no clue that his network had been tracking whispers and shadows, all converging on this glittering gala, where she felt more like an apparition than an attendee. She couldn't have known that her name, spoken once during a simple act of compassion, had lodged itself in the mind of a man who claimed what he desired and obliterated anything that dared oppose him. All Isabella understood was the suffocating familiarity of being overlooked, a curse stitched into her very existence by the people who should have lifted her up. The midnight blue fabric of her gown, a delicate chiffon she'd discovered at a consignment shop, felt like protection, but it was crumbling. It couldn't shield her from the ice in her mother's stare or the careless dismissal in her father's gestures, and it absolutely couldn't defend her against her sister. The incident from last week still burned beneath her carefully constructed mask. She'd been perched in a quiet bookstore cafe, sipping weak coffee and doodling in her journal when a familiar shadow loomed over her. Marcus, her former boyfriend, wearing that trademark smirk as cheap as his cologne. "There you are," he'd sneered, his eyes crawling over her with calculated malice. "Still drowning in oversized sweaters, I see. Looks like you've gained more than confidence since I left you. Did me a favor, really." The words struck like physical blows, igniting that ancient shame that lived in her bones. He was a phantom from a chapter she'd tried to burn, a time when she'd twisted herself into impossible shapes trying to satisfy his impossible standards and always falling short. His cruelty was merely another voice joining the lifelong choir that sang the same endless refrain: insufficient, inadequate, invisible. She'd quietly gathered her things, settled her bill, and slipped away without acknowledging him, though his mocking laughter chased her down the sidewalk. Now, pressed against the ballroom's edge, that laughter replayed in her skull, weaving itself into the crystalline clink of champagne glasses and the hollow conversations of high society. She was a whisper in a room of proclamations, a watercolor in a gallery of neon. Her sister, Celeste, moved through the crowd like liquid silk, wrapped in a dress the shade of fresh blood. Every gaze magnetized to her, and she absorbed the adoration like sustenance. Her husband, a tycoon with eyes like cold coins, served as the ideal ornament for her ambitions. When Celeste's attention finally snagged on Isabella, it carried blades. She drifted closer, her smile predatory and precise. "Still hiding in the margins, baby sister." Celeste's voice dripped like honey laced with arsenic. "You might attempt conversation, though I can't fathom who'd tolerate it." Isabella gripped her vintage clutch, the cracked leather grounding her. "I'm perfectly content here." "You're never content," Celeste scoffed, fingers adjusting the sapphire choker encircling her throat like elegant shackles. "Just look at yourself. That dress makes you resemble a child who raided her grandmother's closet." Each word was engineered to flay her open, to cement her subordinate position. Isabella's shoulders locked. She refused tears. Not now, not before her. Celeste leaned in, her perfume suffocating and artificial. "Seriously, Isabella, what possessed you to attend?" "You're an embarrassment to me. These people don't want you polluting their space." Her laugh rang out then, delicate and crystalline and more vicious than any scream. "Nobody wants you anywhere." The statement landed with surgical precision, demolishing what remained of Isabella's fragile defenses. She registered the nearby guests glancing their direction, curiosity piqued by the spectacle. Celeste pivoted away, erasing her entirely, abandoning Isabella to suffocate in the void she created. The agony was nearly corporeal, a vice crushing her chest until breathing became labor. Celeste was correct. She didn't belong in this space. She didn't belong in any space. She turned to escape, seeking shadows or service corridors, anywhere she could evaporate. But as she moved, she sensed it. A seismic shift in the room's energy. A sudden, profound hush cutting through the chaos. It was a stare, weighty, piercing, and absolutely unrelenting. It originated from across the ballroom, aimed squarely at her. From the opposite end, emerging from an archway swallowed by darkness, he observed her. Isabella had never witnessed someone dominate space through pure stillness. He wore midnight, a suit so dark it devoured surrounding light, sculpted flawlessly over a physique radiating controlled strength. Broad shoulders tapering to a lean torso, height that dwarfed virtually everyone present. His ebony hair swept back with precision, but his face captured her completely. It was constructed from severe planes and merciless edges, beautiful in a way that suggested danger rather than softness. And his eyes. Even across the distance, she recognized them as extraordinary, a shocking ice blue that blazed against his darker features. They locked onto her with disturbing focus, a hunter's concentration that erased everything else in the packed venue. The atmosphere surrounding him seemed charged with silent, lethal energy. People instinctively created distance, their chatter faltering as they passed, their glances skittering away as though direct contact might prove fatal. He was a thunderstorm infiltrating a garden party, and the storm was studying her. Isabella's pulse hammered violently, a trapped creature desperate for escape. Her immediate thought was panic. She must have violated some unspoken rule. Was she occupying reserved territory? Had she accidentally insulted someone powerful? But his expression wasn't fury. It was something altogether different. It was knowing, a profound, resonant certainty that vibrated through the marble expanse separating them. A tremor coursed through her body, equal parts terror and inexplicable magnetism. It felt as though an invisible cord had been stretched between his chest and hers, and he was slowly, methodically beginning to draw it tight. Her sister's brutal declaration, "Nobody wants you," echoed mockingly, a bitter contrast to this man's unwavering focus. It defied logic. Men like him didn't notice women like her. They noticed women like Celeste, polished and powerful and poisonous. Isabella was an unfinished painting, a forgotten song. Then he moved, not abruptly, but with fluid, deliberate purpose, peeling away from the shadows. He stepped forward, and with that single motion, the entire room's atmosphere transformed. A wave of awareness radiated from him like tremors from an earthquake. Whispers erupted, heads swiveled, the party's ambient noise dropped to a tense, curious murmur. He disregarded it all. Those pale eyes never abandoned hers as he began crossing toward her. He didn't rush, yet every movement carried unstoppable intent. Crowd, an ocean of designer gowns and tailored sophistication, divided before him as if choreographed. People dissolved from his trajectory, expressions mixing awe with fear. Isabella stood paralyzed, feet welded to the floor. Escape was impossible. Her mind screamed commands to flee, to vanish, to become the invisible girl her sister claimed she was, but her body refused compliance. She could only watch as the gap between them contracted. 20 feet. 10. He was closer now, details sharpening. A thin, white scar bisected one dark eyebrow, evidence of a history she couldn't begin to comprehend. His mouth formed a firm, serious line, yet held no cruelty, only determination. Celeste, who'd been performing for a captive audience, registered the shift. Her smile wavered as she tracked the collective attention. Her eyes widened, recognizing who approached, then narrowed in absolute bewilderment, realizing his destination. It was Isabella. The most dangerous man present, the mysterious and feared Dante Russo, head of the Crimson Serpent organization, was walking straight toward her worthless little sister. Momentarily, Celeste's flawless mask fractured, exposing raw, hideous confusion beneath. Impossible, a mistake. He must be seeking someone else, someone positioned behind Isabella, but nobody stood there. Only Isabella in her simple blue dress, the unwitting center of unfolding drama that had mesmerized the entire ballroom. He stopped mere inches away. The universe compressed until only they existed, the space between them humming with electric charge. Up close, he was overwhelming. The sheer magnitude of his presence was tangible, pressure against her skin. He carried the scent of expensive cologne, something crisp and sharp like mountain air layered over leather, and something metallic like iron. Isabella had to crane her neck to meet his gaze, and the proximity stole oxygen from her lungs. His pale blue eyes, threaded with silver, burned even brighter now, scanning her face as though memorizing every detail. She glimpsed something in their depths. Not pity, not desire, but something resembling relief, as if he'd completed an arduous journey and finally arrived home. Silence expanded between them, thick and heavy. Isabella's thoughts blanked completely, all anxiety and inadequacy erased by the sheer, staggering impossibility of this moment. She felt perspiration bead along her spine. Finally, he spoke. His voice was deep and smooth, a resonant rumble that vibrated through her core. It was quiet, intended only for her, yet carried the force of absolute command. "You are Isabella," he stated, not a question, a declaration of fact, of revelation. She managed only a small, jerky nod, her throat constricted beyond words. The ghost of a smile touched his mouth, a subtle shift that transformed his harsh face into something devastatingly striking. "I am Dante Russo," he continued. "I have been searching for you." Her mind reeled. Searching for me? The concept was so absurd, so fantastical, it felt plucked from a dream she couldn't identify. "Why?" The word emerged as a strangled whisper, all she could force out. His gaze gentled, unexpected tenderness flickering across his formidable expression. "The young woman who volunteers at the community health center," he said, voice dropping lower. "My grandmother was sick. You stayed hours beyond your shift, ensuring she felt cared for. You brought her warm blankets and chamomile tea. You shared stories about your own grandmother." Memory surfaced, initially foggy, then crystalline. An elderly Italian woman, delicate and frightened, who spoke broken English. Isabella had simply recognized someone's suffering and responded, a small, instinctive kindness she'd almost immediately forgotten. She hadn't realized who the woman was. "She told me about the girl with gentle eyes and a spirit the color of a summer sky," Dante murmured, his gaze dropping to her blue dress before returning to her face. "She said you were something precious." She was absolutely right. Well, isn't this fascinating?" Celeste's voice sliced through the intimate sphere surrounding them. She materialized beside Isabella, her husband lumbering behind like an over-guard dog. Her smile was brittle, stretched thin across her face in a desperate grab for control. "Mr. Russo," she purred, tone saturated with false warmth. "I don't believe you've been properly introduced to my family. This is my little sister, Isabella. She's rather timid." She placed a possessive hand on Isabella's shoulder, grip just slightly too firm. A silent threat. "I'm certain she's tremendously flattered by your attention, but she's really not suited to this type of environment." The dismissal was transparent. "She's beneath you. She's unworthy of your time." Dante's gaze shifted to Celeste. The warmth that had illuminated his eyes while observing Isabella vanished, replaced by arctic emptiness. The temperature seemed to plummet. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "I am not addressing you," he said, the words sharp and frigid as shattered ice. Celeste recoiled as if slapped. Angry color flooded her cheeks. Her husband inflated his chest, stepping forward slightly. "Now wait just a minute." Dante's eyes flicked toward him and the man froze, his bravado collapsing like a punctured tire. Whatever he witnessed in that pale, flat stare made him retreat half a step, his mouth snapping shut. Dante's attention returned to Isabella, his expression softening again. He completely ignored her sister as if she'd ceased existing. He extended his hand toward Isabella, palm open. It was a large hand with elegant fingers and scarred knuckles that spoke of a life far removed from glittering galas. "Isabella," he said, his voice a low, commanding murmur that cut through Celeste's sputtering outrage. "Will you permit me to escort you somewhere more comfortable?" It was an invitation, a choice, but it resonated like destiny declaring itself. This was her crossroads. She could shrink back under Celeste's grip, retreat into shadows, or she could accept his hand. She looked from his waiting palm to her sister's furious expression, and for the first time in her existence, she felt defiance spark to life. She shrugged off Celeste's hand. Then, slowly, she placed her trembling fingers in his. His skin was warm and solid. As his fingers closed around hers, a jolt of pure energy shot through her arm. He drew her forward, tucking her hand into the crook of his elbow and settling her against his side. The solid wall of his body became a fortress. He turned, his gaze sweeping the stunned observers and the seething Celeste before leading Isabella away. It was a silent public claiming, more powerful than any shouted announcement. He was taking her, and nobody in that room dared interfere. He guided her not back into the throng, but through tall glass doors opening onto a private stone terrace. The cool night air soothed Isabella's flushed skin. Below them, the city sparkled like scattered diamonds, and the party noise faded to a distant, muffled drone. The terrace was illuminated by soft lantern glow, casting long, dancing shadows across the stone. A gentle breeze stirred the chiffon of her dress around her legs. Dante didn't release her until they reached the far railing. He let go of her hand but remained close, turning to lean against the stone, his powerful frame forming a barrier between her and the world. For a long moment, they stood in silence, the quiet more soothing than awkward. Isabella gripped the cool railing, knuckles white, attempting to process the dizzying cascade of events. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice softer now, stripped of the icy authority he'd wielded against her sister. She looked at him, truly looked at him, away from prying eyes. The harsh lines of his face seemed to soften in the gentle light. The scar above his eye was more visible, a pale silver mark against his skin. "I don't know what I am," she admitted, voice barely audible. "I don't understand. Your grandmother, that was months ago." "Some things are worth the wait," he replied simply. His gaze was steady, patient. "My grandmother has a gift. She sees people's true nature, the connections that bind them. She told me a thread beginning with her led to you, and that your thread was spun from starlight." Isabella shook her head, a small disbelieving smile touching her lips. "I think your grandmother is mistaken. My thread is dull brown twine, and it's mostly unraveling." The words escaped before she could stop them, a raw fragment of her insecurity laid bare. Dante pushed off the railing and stepped closer. He was so near now she could see the intricate weave of his shirt fabric, the faint shadow of stubble along his jaw. He lifted a hand, not to touch her, but to gently brush away a loose strand that had fallen across her face, his fingers barely grazing her skin. A fleeting contact sent a shiver cascading through her entire body. "She is never mistaken," he said, his voice a low, intense murmur. "They have conditioned you to see yourself through a distorted lens. They need you to believe you are ordinary so their own brilliance appears greater." His eyes held hers, and in their pale depths she witnessed an unwavering conviction that left her breathless. "I see you, Isabella. I see the resilience you mistake for ordinariness. I see the light you try desperately to extinguish. I see the starlight." His words coiled around her heart, squeezing gently. Nobody had ever spoken to her this way. Nobody had ever looked at her and seen beyond the surface. They saw the quiet girl, the plain sister, the afterthought. They saw what they wanted to see, a reflection of their own biases. But this man, this dangerous, powerful stranger, saw something else entirely. He saw a truth about herself that she'd never dared embrace. "Why?" she asked again, the words saturated with desperate need to understand. "Why go to such lengths for a stranger who gave your grandmother a cup of tea?" "It was not just tea," he corrected softly. "It was compassion. In a world where compassion is currency, you offered it freely with no expectation of return. That is rarer than any jewel in that ballroom, and it is not weakness. It is a form of strength they will never comprehend." He watched her, his expression unreadable except for the intensity in his eyes. "My world is complex. It is filled with darkness and dangerous edges. Truth is a weapon and loyalty is armor. I have been seeking something authentic, something that is not theater or transaction." He paused, his gaze dropping to her lips for a heartbeat before returning to her eyes. "My grandmother recognized it in you, and now, so do I." Tears burned behind Isabella's eyes, hot and sudden. She fought them fiercely. Crying felt like a vulnerability she couldn't afford. But one rebellious tear escaped, tracing a silent path down her cheek. Before she could brush it away, Dante's thumb was there, his touch impossibly gentle against her skin. The pad of his thumb was slightly rough, a callous texture that spoke of a life of action, not leisure. The contrast between his fearsome reputation and this tender, careful gesture was enough to shatter her remaining composure. The sob she'd been suppressing escaped, a quiet, fractured sound. She expected him to retreat, to be repelled by her emotional display. Instead, he simply held his hand there, his thumb stroking her cheek until the tear was gone. "There is no shame in the wounds they have inflicted," he murmured, his voice a comforting anchor in her emotional tempest. "The shame belongs entirely to them." In that moment, something inside her transformed. A barrier she had constructed over years, stone by painful stone, began to collapse. She was exhausted from being strong, from being resilient, from enduring. For the first time, she felt visible. And in being visible, she felt the first fragile possibility of being safe. Let us know what you think Dante should do to Isabella's sister in the comments. 3 months later, Isabella woke to the aroma of freshly ground coffee and soft morning light streaming through panoramic windows. She was not in her cramped childhood bedroom with its peeling paint and view of an alley. She was in Dante's penthouse suite, a tranquil space of minimalist design, rich mahogany, and stunning views of the cityscape. She stretched, the luxurious Egyptian cotton sheets cool against her skin. The blue dress from the gala hung preserved in her expansive walk-in closet, a relic from a life that felt eons distant. She was no longer that girl. the one who cowered from shadows and survived on scraps of affection her family deigned to toss her way. That girl was a specter, a distant memory. The woman she had become smiled hearing the soft clink of porcelain in the kitchen. She slipped from bed, pulling on one of Dante's soft charcoal cashmere sweaters. It fell to mid-thigh, enveloping her in his scent. She padded barefoot across the cool marble floor into the open-concept living space. He stood at the kitchen counter, his back to her, dressed in simple navy sweatpants and a fitted shirt that stretched across his broad shoulders. He was focused on preparing 2 cups of coffee, his movements precise and economical. The morning sun caught hints of silver in his dark hair, and the feared leader of the Crimson Serpent organization looked domestic, peaceful. The sight made her heart swell with a fierce, protective love she hadn't known she possessed. He must have sensed her presence because he turned, a small private smile on his lips. "Good morning," he said, his voice still thick with sleep. He extended a mug toward her. "I thought you might be awake." "You always think that," she teased, accepting the warm mug. Her fingers brushed against his and the familiar spark danced between them. "How do you do it?" "I listen for the sound of your heart beginning its day," he answered, his expression completely earnest. The simple, poetic statement sent warmth flooding through her. With him, romance wasn't grand gestures, but these quiet, intimate moments. It was how he always ensured the kitchen was stocked with her favorite herbal tea. The way he had dedicated a section of his vast library to photography books just for her. The way he would trace the lines of her palm when he thought she was asleep. He had revealed a world she never knew existed, not of crime and violence, but of unwavering devotion, fierce protection, and complete acceptance. He had given her a home not constructed of walls and furniture, but of his steadfast presence. She was safe. She was cherished. She was loved. The past still lingered, but it no longer possessed the power to wound her. 2 weeks after the gala, a check had arrived from her father. A substantial sum accompanied by a terse note stating it was her final distribution from the family. It was a severing of bonds, a transactional dismissal. The Isabella of the past would have been shattered. The Isabella who was discovering her own value simply donated the check to the community health center where Dante's grandmother had been treated. She never heard from her parents again. Celeste was a different matter. The society columns had been ruthless after the gala. The story of the enigmatic Dante publicly rejecting the tycoon's wife for her plain younger sister had become legendary. Celeste's meticulously constructed world had detonated. Her husband, whose empire was built on fragile alliances, had suffered. Reputations had been ruined. Isabella knew through the discreet channels of Dante's network that Celeste's marriage was disintegrating, her social status demolished. A part of her felt grim satisfaction, but it was hollow, fleeting. Mostly, she just felt profound pity for the woman who had needed to diminish others to feel substantial. One rainy afternoon, a letter arrived. It was addressed to her in Celeste's perfect, elegant script. Isabella let it rest on the entry table for a day before finally opening it. It was 15 pages long, a rambling, desperate mixture of accusations, self-pity, and finally a raw, broken apology. It spoke of a lifetime of envy, of being pressured by their parents to embody perfection while Isabella was permitted to be herself. It was the pathetic, ugly truth behind years of cruelty. She read it, folded it, and placed it in a drawer. Forgiveness was complicated terrain, a landscape she wasn't prepared to navigate yet. Perhaps someday, but her future was here in this sunlit apartment with this man who saw her starlight when she only saw dust. Dante came to stand behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist and resting his chin on her shoulder. He gazed out at the sprawling city below them. "What are you thinking about?" he asked softly. Isabella leaned back against his solid chest, feeling the steady rhythm of his heart against her spine. "I was thinking," she said, her voice clear and strong, "that this is a beautiful view." He tightened his arms around her, his lips brushing her temple. "It is," he agreed. "But my favorite view is right here." She smiled, a genuine, radiant smile that reached her eyes. The unraveling brown twine she'd once believed herself to be had been a lie. He had been right. She was starlight, and she was finally home. We hope you enjoyed this story. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more romantic tales.